The rain was coming down in thick, icy sheets, the kind that soaks through your clothes and chills your very bones in seconds. I stood there, on the sidewalk I had swept every Saturday for 5 years, staring at the front door of the house I called home. My suitcases, 2 battered pieces of luggage I'd managed to grab before the locks clicked, were already turning a darker shade of blue as they absorbed the water. My brother, Mark, stood behind the glass of the storm door, his silhouette framed by the warm, amber glow of the living room. He didn't look guilty. He looked triumphant. "I told you, Leo," his voice muffled by the glass, but sharp enough to cut through the wind. "This isn't a charity ward. It's my house now. Mom and Dad wanted it this way. You've had enough free rides. Find a bridge to sleep under." He reached out, his hand grasping the handle of the heavy oak door, and slammed it shut. I heard the deadbolt slide into place. Thunk. It was the sound of a decade of brotherhood being severed. It was the sound of a lie being sealed. I looked down at the soggy manila envelope tucked under my arm, protected by my waterproof jacket. Mark thought he had just won. He thought he had successfully stolen the roof over my head and the legacy of our parents. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine as he went back to sit on the sofa I paid for, was that the deed in his desk was a forgery, and the real one was right here, trembling in my hands. It's funny how fast your life can shrink. One minute I was a homeowner, a brother, a man with a future. The next, I was a guy with 2 wet bags and a dead phone battery standing under the flickering neon sign of a 24-hour diner 3 blocks away. I sat in the corner booth, the vinyl sticking to my damp jeans, ordering a black coffee I couldn't really taste. The betrayal wasn't just about the house. It was the way Mark did it. He had waited until exactly 6 months after our mother passed away. He knew that was when I was at my weakest. He had spent those months whispering, gaslighting, and slowly moving his girlfriend, Sarah, into the spare room. Then came the missing will. Then came the new deed he claimed to have found in a safe deposit box I didn't know existed. "You're just the loser brother, Leo," he'd told me earlier that evening, while Sarah watched from the stairs with a smirk. "I'm the one with the degree. I'm the one with the high-paying job. Why would Dad leave a 3-story Victorian to a guy who fixes watches for a living? It doesn't make sense. Admit it. You forged the first one, and I'm just correcting the record." The injustice burned in my throat like acid. I had spent 4 years nursing our father with Parkinson's, while Mark was finding himself in Europe. I was the one who changed the bandages, who handled the late-night hospital runs, and who kept the business running so we wouldn't lose everything. Mark showed up for the funeral in a rented suit, crying louder than anyone, and then stayed. He stayed and began to colonize my life like a parasite. As I sat in that diner, watching the steam rise from my cup, I realized he really believed his own lie. He believed because he was louder, more aggressive, and more successful in the eyes of the world, he deserved what I had built. He didn't realize that silence isn't weakness. He didn't realize that while he was busy practicing his big brother speeches, I was busy making sure the foundation of this family was legally ironclad.
To understand why this hurt so much, you have to understand the house on Willow Creek. It wasn't just real estate. To us, it was the 4th member of the family. My dad bought it in the late 80s when it was a ruin. He spent 20 years stripping the wallpaper, sanding the floorboards, and fixing the plumbing. I was his shadow. By the time I was 10, I knew which floorboards creaked and how to bleed the radiators in the winter. Mark was always different. He was 5 years older and lived in a different world. He hated the dust, hated the manual labor. He wanted the fast lane. "This place is a coffin, Leo," he used to tell me when we were teenagers. "As soon as I graduate, I'm out. You can stay here and rot with the old man." And he did leave. He went to a prestigious university, then took a job in corporate finance. He'd come home for Christmas, talk about his portfolio and his network, and look at my grease-stained hands with a mixture of pity and disgust. I stayed. I opened a small watch repair shop in the garage. I liked the precision of it. I liked that things could be fixed if you were patient enough. When Dad got sick, the house started to feel heavy. The medical bills were astronomical. Mark sent thoughts and prayers and the occasional $500 check that usually bounced. I took out a second mortgage in my name because Dad's credit was shot to keep the lights on and the nurses paid. One night, about a year before Dad passed, we were sitting on the porch. The smell of jasmine was heavy in the air, and the crickets were loud. Dad looked at me, his hands shaking, and handed me a leather binder. "Leo," he whispered, his voice raspy, "Mark has the world. He has his career and his city life. But you have this house. It's yours, not just because I love you, but because you saved it. I've put everything in your name. Don't tell him yet. He's got a hunger in him that isn't healthy. Just promise me you'll keep the roof from leaking." I promised. I didn't care about the money. I just wanted to keep the memories alive. I remembered the way Mom used to bake cinnamon rolls in that kitchen, the scent filling every room. I remembered the height marks etched into the doorframe of the pantry. That house was my heart. After Dad died, Mom followed quickly. Heartbreak is a real medical condition. I'm convinced of it. She passed in her sleep holding a photo of Dad. That's when Mark came back, not to grieve, but to claim. He moved in temporarily to help with the estate. I was too tired, too buried in grief to say no. I thought maybe, just maybe, losing our parents would bring us together. I thought the house could be a bridge. I was wrong. It was a battlefield. The change was subtle at first. It started with the we. "We should really repaint the kitchen, Leo," Mark would say over breakfast. "The yellow is so dated." Then a week later, it became I think I'm going to hire some contractors to knock down that wall. It'll open up the space." When I reminded him that I liked the wall, that it was where Mom's antique hutch sat, he would just laugh. "You have no vision, little brother. You're stuck in the past." Then Sarah arrived. She was a consultant Mark met at a bar. Within 2 weeks, she had moved her entire wardrobe into our parents' old bedroom. I came home from work one day to find my mother's vanity in the hallway, covered in a dusty sheet. "What is this?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Oh, Leo," Sarah said, not even looking up from her phone. "That old thing was taking up so much room. I needed space for my ring light and my skincare fridge. Mark said it was fine." I confronted Mark in the kitchen. "You can't just move Mom's things. This is still my house, Mark." He stopped pouring his wine and looked at me. His eyes were cold, calculating. "Is it, though? I've been looking at the paperwork, Leo. Dad was pretty out of it at the end. I'm not sure those signatures of yours would hold up in court. As the eldest son, I have a responsibility to manage this asset properly." "Asset?" I spat. "It's a home." "It's $600,000 in equity," he corrected. Over the next few months, the gaslighting intensified. Mail started disappearing, specifically my bank statements and property tax notices. I'd find the garage door left open, or my tools borrowed and left out in the rain to rust. When I'd get angry, Mark would call our cousins and tell them I was having a breakdown and couldn't handle the grief. He started inviting his high-powered friends over for dinner parties I wasn't invited to. I'd be in the garage, working on a 1920s Patek Philippe, hearing the roar of laughter and the clinking of glasses from the dining room. I was a ghost in my own home. The most chilling moment was a Tuesday night in November. I walked past Mark's office, formerly Dad's study, and heard him on the phone. "Yeah, the lawyer says the new deed is ready. It's a bit of a process to backdate the filing, but money talks. Once it's in the system, Leo won't have a leg to stand on. He's just a high school grad with a hobby. No judge is going to believe he owns $1 million property over a VP of finance."
I froze in the hallway. My blood turned to ice. He wasn't just being a jerk, he was committing a crime. He was trying to erase me.
The next few weeks were a psychological war. Mark stopped pretending to be a brother. He became a landlord, a cruel one. "I'm charging you rent, Leo," he announced one morning. $2,000 a month, retroactive for the last 3 months. You owe me $6,000 by Friday or I'm calling the sheriff. "You can't charge me rent for a house I own, Mark. I have the deed." "You have a piece of paper signed by a dying man with dementia," he sneered. "I have a notarized transfer of title from the estate to the primary heir. That's me. I checked the county records. Strange thing, your name isn't there anymore." I rushed to the courthouse that afternoon. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely sign the request form. When the clerk pulled up the digital record, my stomach dropped. There it was. Transfer of title, Leo Vance to Mark Vance. Consideration, $1. He had forged my signature. He had used his connections to get it filed. He had stolen the ground from under my feet. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car in the courthouse parking lot and cried. I cried for my dad, who thought he had protected me. I cried for my mom, who always said, "Family is all you have." And then the sadness turned into a cold, hard knot of rage. Mark didn't realize who he was dealing with. He saw a quiet watchmaker. He didn't see the man who spent hundreds of hours under a magnifying glass looking for the tiniest imperfections in gears and springs. He didn't realize that my job was literally finding out what was broken and fixing it. I went home and played the part. I acted defeated. I told him I couldn't pay the $6,000. I let him yell. I let him insult me. I even let Sarah tell me that maybe a studio apartment would be more your speed. "I just need a few weeks to find a place," I told them, my voice trembling. "You have 1 week. Next Friday, there's a gala here for my firm. I want you out before the catering crew arrives. I don't want my colleagues seeing, well, you." That was the week he started renovations. And by renovations, I mean he started destroying things. He ripped out the built-in bookshelves Dad had carved by hand. He threw away the old garden tools. Every time I heard the sound of a hammer or a crowbar, it felt like he was hitting me in the chest. But while he was destroying the surface, I was digging into the foundations. I contacted Mr. Henderson, Dad's old attorney who had retired to Florida. It took 3 days to track him down. "Leo, is that you?" The old man's voice crackled over the phone. "I was wondering when you'd call. Your father was a smart man, Leo. He knew Mark. He knew what would happen if he left things simple." "What do you mean, Mr. Henderson? Mark changed the deed. He forged my name." "Oh, I'm sure he did," Henderson chuckled darkly. "But Mark is a finance guy. He thinks in terms of titles and deeds. He doesn't think in terms of trusts."
"A trust?" I asked, leaning against the cold brick wall of my shop. "Listen carefully, Leo," Mr. Henderson said. "About 2 years before he passed, your father came to me. He said, 'My eldest son is going to try to sell the family soul for a nickel.' So we didn't just transfer the house to you, we created the Vance Heritage Trust. The house isn't owned by you, and it wasn't owned by your father at the time of his death. It's owned by the trust." My heart began to race. And who controls the trust? You do, solely. But here's the kicker, Leo. Your father added a bad actor clause. If any heir attempts to contest the trust or use fraudulent means to claim assets, they are immediately disinherited from all family holdings, including the life insurance residuals and the small plot of land in the valley. But Mark filed a deed change at the county office. He filed a change for a property that the estate no longer owned, Henderson explained. He basically filed a deed for a car that had already been sold to someone else. It's a worthless piece of paper. In fact, it's evidence of felony fraud. I have the original notarized trust documents in my safe here. I also have a video of your father in full mental health explaining exactly why he did this. I felt a weight lift off me so suddenly I almost fell over. I wasn't homeless. I was the owner of everything Mark was currently trying to take. "What do I do?" I asked. "You wait," Henderson said. "Let him think he's won. Let him put his name on things. Let him spend his money on those renovations. The more he acts like the owner, the more evidence we have of his intent to defraud. I'm sending the documents via a secure courier today. They'll be with you by Thursday." Thursday, the day before the gala, the day before I was supposed to be kicked out. I spent the next 2 days acting like a broken man. I packed boxes. I let Sarah graciously donate my old clothes to charity. I even apologized to Mark for being difficult. "Glad you've seen reason," he said, patting me on the shoulder like a dog. "Maybe I'll give you a recommendation for a job, a real job, something with a tie." I just nodded and went back to my room. In my hand was the manila envelope that had arrived that morning. Inside was the truth. It was the Vance Heritage Trust Agreement, stamped, sealed, and backed by a video confession from my father. I looked at the guest list for Mark's gala, which he had left on the kitchen counter. It was a who's who of the local business community, including the district attorney and several city council members. Mark wanted to show off his new estate. He wanted a grand entrance into high society. I decided I was going to give him an entrance he'd never forget. Friday morning arrived with a grim gray sky. The house was a hive of activity. Florists were lugging in massive arrangements of white lilies. A catering team was setting up in the kitchen, complaining about the outdated appliances. Mark was in a tuxedo by noon, walking around with a clipboard, barking orders at everyone. "Leo, why are your bags still in the hallway?" he yelled. "The guests will be here in 4 hours. Get your junk out of here." "I'm just waiting for my ride, Mark," I said quietly. "Well, wait for it on the curb. Sarah, tell the movers to just toss his stuff on the lawn if he isn't gone in 20 minutes. I dragged my bags out into the rain. I didn't fight him. I didn't argue. I just stood there under the eaves of the porch, clutching that envelope. I watched as my life's work, my shop, was cleared out by 2 guys Mark had hired to turn it into a cigar lounge. Every minute felt like an hour. I was waiting for one more thing. Mr. Henderson had promised he'd contacted a colleague of his, a high-end litigation attorney named Evelyn Vance. No relation, just a coincidence that Dad loved. At 4 p.m., a black sedan pulled up. A woman in a sharp gray suit stepped out. She didn't look like a lawyer. She looked like an assassin in business casual. "Leo Vance?" she asked, shielding her eyes from the rain. "Yes. I have the injunction," she said, handing me a second envelope, "and the police are on standby. We also have a representative from the county clerk's office who is, shall we say, very interested in how a forged deed was entered into their system." "Wait," I said. "Not yet. Let the party start. He wants an audience. I think it's only fair he gets one." Evelyn smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "I like the way you think, Leo. I'll be in the car. Signal me when the host starts his speech." I spent the next 2 hours huddled in the diner down the street, drying off. I watched the limos and luxury SUVs pull up to my house. I saw the lights blaring, heard the music drifting through the air. Mark was in there drinking champagne, telling everyone how he had inherited this beautiful piece of history and how he planned to modernize it for the new generation. He was at the peak of his mountain. It was time for the landslide.
At 7 p.m., I walked back to the house. I didn't go to the back door. I walked straight up the front steps and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The foyer was packed. People in diamonds and silk turned to look at the wet, disheveled man standing in the doorway. The music, some light jazz, seemed to falter. Mark was standing on the grand staircase, a glass of crystal in his hand, Sarah clinging to his arm. He looked down and his face turned a shade of purple I'd never seen before. "Leo, what the hell are you doing? I told you to leave." "I forgot something, Mark," I said, my voice projecting clearly across the room. I'd spent years being the quiet one, but tonight my voice didn't shake. "Get out!" Mark shouted, coming down the stairs. "Security! Someone get this vagrant out of my house!" "Your house?" I asked, stepping into the center of the room. That's funny, because I was just talking to the county clerk and an attorney, and they seem to think there's been a bit of a misunderstanding. The crowd went silent. People love a scandal, and Mark's colleagues were already whispering. "You're drunk," Mark hissed, reaching for my arm. "You're making a scene because you're jealous. Everyone, I'm so sorry. My brother hasn't been well since our parents passed." "I'm fine, Mark," I said, pulling away, "but I think you should tell everyone about the deed you filed last month, the one where you signed my name, the one where you transferred the house to yourself for $1. "That's a lie," Sarah chimed in, her voice shrill. "Mark is the rightful heir. He has the paperwork." "He has a forgery," I said, "and more importantly, he has a problem, because this house isn't part of the estate. It never was." I pulled out the trust documents. "This is the Vance Heritage Trust, established 3 years ago. It's the legal owner of this property, the business, and all family assets. And, according to the trust, Mark, you don't even have the right to be on the porch, let alone hosting a party." Mark laughed, a high, nervous sound. "A trust? You're making things up, Leo. I've seen the will. There was no trust." "That's because Dad knew you'd try to break a will. A trust is much harder to touch, especially when it has a video component." I looked over at the large flat-screen TV Mark had installed in the living room for his corporate presentations. I walked over, plugged in a small USB drive I'd been carrying, and hit play. The room went dead silent as my father's face appeared on the screen. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. "If you're watching this," my father's voice filled the room, "it means my son Mark has done exactly what I feared. Mark, you always thought you were the smartest person in the room, but you forgot that a house is built on a foundation, not on a spreadsheet." In the video, Dad held up the very documents I was holding. "I am placing everything in a trust managed solely by Leo. Leo is the one who stayed. Leo is the one who cared. Mark, if you have attempted to seize this house by force or fraud, which I suspect you have, the bad actor clause is now in effect. You are hereby disinherited. You have no claim to this house, my life insurance, or the Vance name. Leo, call the police. Give him nothing." The screen went black. The silence in the room was deafening. Mark's glass slipped from his hand and shattered on the hardwood floor. Sarah looked like she wanted to melt into the rug. "It's a deep fake," Mark screamed, though his voice lacked conviction. "It's made with AI. It's not real." Evelyn, my attorney, stepped through the front door at that exact moment, followed by 2 uniformed officers. "It's very real, Mr. Vance," she said, holding up a folder. "I have the original filings and the notary's affidavit. I also have a warrant for your arrest on suspicion of property deed fraud and identity theft. The county clerk was very helpful once we showed them the discrepancy." The guests began to scramble for the exits. No one wanted to be caught in the middle of a felony arrest. Within minutes, the gala had turned into a mass exodus. "Leo, wait," Mark pleaded, his face pale. "We're brothers. We can talk about this. I was just trying to maximize the value for both of us." "You kicked me out in the rain, Mark. You threw Mom's vanity in the trash. You tried to erase Dad's life. You aren't my brother. You're just a guy who tried to steal my house." The police didn't cuff him right away, but they made it clear he was leaving. He was allowed to pack 1 bag, just like I had. Sarah was already gone. She'd slipped out the back the moment she saw the badges. She was a consultant, after all. She knew when a project had no ROI. As Mark stood on the porch, clutching a single suitcase, the irony wasn't lost on anyone. It had stopped raining, but the air was freezing. "Where am I supposed to go?" he asked, his voice small. "All my money is tied up in the renovations. I spent $80,000 on this place in the last month. Consider it a gift to the trust, and don't worry about your job. I imagine the firm won't be thrilled when the news of your fraud charges hits the papers tomorrow." The legal fallout was swift. With the evidence of the trust and the blatant forgery of the deed, Mark had no defense. He ended up taking a plea deal to avoid prison time, 5 years of probation, heavy fines, and a permanent felony record that effectively ended his career in finance. He's currently working at a car wash 3 towns over. I haven't spoken to him since that night. Sarah vanished. I heard she moved to the coast to find a new consultant. The house, however, needed a lot of work. Mark's modernization had been a disaster. He'd painted over original mahogany and ripped out historical fixtures. But, like I said, I fix things. I used the life insurance money, which Mark was now legally barred from touching, to restore the house properly. I brought back the bookshelves. I found a vanity that looked just like Mom's. I turned the cigar lounge back into my watch repair shop, but bigger and better than before. The most satisfying part wasn't the money or the house itself. It was the feeling of walking into the kitchen and knowing that the foundation was solid. No more lies, no more whispers, no more shadows in the hallway. A few months later, I was sitting on the porch again. It was a warm evening, much like the one when Dad gave me the binder. The jasmine was in bloom, and the house felt peaceful. For the first time in years, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a home. I thought a lot about revenge during those first few weeks. I thought about how much I wanted to see Mark suffer. But as I sat there, listening to the familiar creak of the house settling, I realized that the best revenge wasn't his downfall, it was my peace. I'd learned that you can't force family to be what they aren't. Mark was a Vance by blood, but he never understood what that meant. He thought it meant power and prestige. I knew it meant stewardship and memory. I still have the forged deed. I kept it as a reminder. It's framed in my shop, tucked away in a corner where only I can see it. It reminds me that things aren't always what they appear to be. It reminds me that the quietest person in the room usually has the most keys. Sometimes I look at the pantry doorframe, at those height marks. I see Mark's name at the 6-foot mark and mine just below it. I haven't painted over them. They're part of the history of this house, even the parts that hurt. I'm moving forward now. I've started taking on apprentices, kids from the local trade school who want to learn how to fix things that the rest of the world thinks are broken. I tell them the same thing Dad told me. Take your time, look at the gears, find the truth. The rest will take care of itself. The house is full of life again, and this time it's the right kind of life. This story taught me that family isn't always who you share a last name with. It's who shows up when the roof is leaking and the world is cold. I stood my ground because I knew the truth, even when it felt like I was losing everything. But I want to hear from you. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you were supposed to trust? Have you ever had to fight for something that was rightfully yours, even when the odds were against you? Maybe it wasn't a house, maybe it was a job, a relationship, or just your own dignity. How did you handle it? Did you stay quiet, or did you find your voice? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read as many as I can, and your experiences often help others realize they're not alone in their struggles. If this story resonated with you, if you enjoyed seeing justice served, please hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you know. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story of resilience and truth. Thanks for being part of the journey. I'll see you in the next story.